that God that was standing on top of the stairs is not just up there and we have to ascend to him. He came down. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. The glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. John 1:14. In our day, it's easy to forget that Jesus changed everything when he came. He saved us from sin, showed us the Father, and brought heaven to earth. What does it mean to follow Jesus and his good news? What does it mean for everyday Christians to live in this reality of the kingdom? Join John and Kate Harris as we learn what it means to live the life of knowing Jesus. We're here for the kingdom of God, on earth as it is in heaven, as he dwells among us. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dwell Among Us podcast. I am John without an H, and as you can see or hear, I am not here with my lovely wife Caitlin. She's feeling a bit under the weather, so I'll be taking on today's episode by myself. Hopefully you're not too disappointed. She will be back next week and every other subsequent week from now on till eternity, so she better get ready. This is her last day off, but no, I'm just kidding. But I'm so excited to be here with you, and this has been absolutely one of my absolute favorite things we have done on the podcast, this series about reading the Bible as a story. And I think I wanted to take a few minutes at the beginning and just kind of reiterate why we are doing this. So in my studies I went to Oral Roberts University and did theology. One of the biggest things I learned about the Bible is one of my professors used to always say, he'd walk in and read the Bible in context. He would say, read the Bible in context. He would say, read the Bible in context. Another one of my professors would say, text without a context is a pretext for a proof text. And what that simply means is that when you just approach something and read it without understanding what's behind what's being said, you can basically use it to mean whatever you want. And that's the importance of reading the Bible as a story. The context of the Bible is that it is a story about the people of God leading to their salvation through the Messiah, Jesus Christ. That is the context. It is a story about God in search of humanity. And that's what we're really trying to get across. We've been really kind of deep diving in these Genesis narratives. And like I said, we're going to get a little bit quicker as we go on. But we're going to do an overview of the whole story of the Bible leading to Jesus. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can further do it in your own time. But as I've said, we've talked about creation and what God was doing in creation. What does Genesis 1, what is it theologically saying? And what is the Garden of Eden all about? What is the tree? What even is the tree of knowledge of good and evil? You know? And so we talked about all that stuff. We talked about Cain and Abel. We talked about Noah. We talked about Abraham. And last week we talked about Isaac. And we started on Jacob and we got up to where he was at Bethel and he saw God on the staircase. And we talked about what some of that means. Please go listen to the last episode if you want to hear about all of that. However, today I want to continue to talk about Jacob's story and kind of go here. Jacob's story there's a main part, and it seems to go from there's the kind of the beginning, and then the first real just meeting he has with God is at Bethel, which we talked about in the last episode. Is that's where Abram, before he becomes Abraham, starts in the promised land. So Abram comes from Ur of the Chaldeans, comes around and makes his tent dwell between Bethel and Ai, but that's about where Jacob is. But Jacob's retracing the steps of Abraham. He's going backwards. And part of why he's going backwards geographically is to show that in his heart, in his spiritual walk, he's going backwards spiritually. He is not exactly where he should be. Instead of blessing the nations around him, the nation he was contending with in his womb, remember what it says about Rachel, she had 2 nations in her womb, and God said that to her. The other nation he has always known for his whole life, he has been deceiving and he stole from him. So Jacob has been established that he has lived up to his name. He is a deceiver, and he trips other people up. Literally, his name means grabbing at the heel. So he trips other people up to get his own way. And that's what we wanted to talk about today. He has this encounter with God at Bethel. Bethel simply means the house of God, and Jacob names it that after this encounter because he's so surprised, because back in the ancient world, they had designated spots where people had encountered spirits before. A lot of times they were up on mountains, and they would have either shrines or altars. Sometimes they would have big things, a bit pyramid-like structures called ziggurats. And Jacob goes to sleep. He sleeps on this rock. And then as he goes to sleep, he sees a stairway to heaven. And he sees angels going up and down, but he sees God up at the top. And what's interesting about that is when you get into a little bit of the Old Testament and the way the Old Testament speaks about God, it kind of gives us these two ideas, that God is absolutely unable to be seen, but then there's people that see him all the time. So like Abraham, a lot, like Jacob will even say later as we come, I've seen God's face, but I've lived. And so they know that there's something like, oh, this high God that we serve, we shouldn't be able to see him, but then all of a sudden we do see him. So what's that? So there's like this visible Yahweh and this invisible Yahweh. And what Jacob sees here, standing at the top of the stairs, is God. He sees God. And he sees angels going up and down doing the work of God. And what are they doing? Well, precisely, they're doing what God says to Jacob. What God says to Jacob is, he repeats Abraham's blessing. And he says, I will give you this land, and I will make your descendants as much as the stars and much as the dust of the earth, and all of this stuff, and I will be with you wherever you go. And whoever curses you, I'll curse. And whoever blesses you, I'll bless. And you, all of the nations. Here's what he says. All of the nations will bless themselves in you. So that's what the angels are doing. And remember, we said about Abraham that that's the gospel. Paul looks back at this declaration and he says, this is the good news. Because God wasn't just talking about Isaac and Jacob and their literal descendants, but that word offspring that God would give in the Septuagint, in the Greek, what Paul would have been reading. It says, you're in your seed, singular. He's talking about Jesus. And Abraham, they don't even see that in its entirety. So there is a physical fulfillment that happens in the beginning, but then it repeats itself and is completely fulfilled in the person of Jesus Christ. And similar here, because this story doesn't just happen here, it has something to play later with Jesus. So let's go forward into that. And in John chapter 1, Jesus actually makes reference to this story. So it says in John 1, chapter 1, verse 43, it says, the following day Jesus wanted to go to Galilee, and he found Philip, and he said to him, follow me. Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, we have found him whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. And Nathanael said to him, can anything good come out of Nazareth? You know, there's kind of a repetition even here, is like God was there without Nathanael even knowing. Same happens to Jacob way back. So Philip said to him, come and see. Philip repeats that phrase, come and see. Jesus said, come and see earlier in verse 39, but getting distracted. Jesus saw Nathanael coming towards him, and he said of him, behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no guile, is no deceit. And Nathanael said to him, how do you know me? Jesus answered, he said, before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you. And so he tells Nathanael that Jesus tells Nathanael that he saw Nathanael sitting under this tree before he even met Nathanael in person. And so Nathanael's surprised and he says, Rabbi, you're the Son of God, you're the King of Israel. And Jesus answered and said to him, because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? You will see greater things than these. And listen to what he says he'll see. Most assuredly, I say to you, hereafter you shall see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. So Jesus takes this story in Genesis 28 and tells us that was him. So the God that was up on top of the stairway that Jacob saw has descended those stairs and come into our lives. Oh, it's so good. That's what Jesus does with this. And we see, oh, that was Christ. And not only does he descend there and see Nathanael, but he's about to descend in Jacob's life a little bit later in the story when we get to that. And we'll talk about what all that means. But that God that was standing on top of the stairs is not just up there, and we have to ascend to him. He came down. That's why I said earlier, there's a great Jewish writer who actually wrote in the 1900s, and he did some with the civil rights movement. His name was Abraham Joshua Heschel, but he wrote a great book that a lot of my professors recommended and talk about, and it was God. All of the Bible, he said, is God in search of man. And this is that story just written right here. And there's a mountain in front of Jacob, and he's seeing into heaven and what God's doing. It's a repeat. Jacob is, remember we said Eden was the mountain of God. And Abraham went up on what would become the new mountain of God, Jerusalem earlier. And now Jacob sees God on top of a stairway. And what are stairways? More than just manufactured, human-made mountains. It's all this imagery is getting repeated over and over and over again for us to see. Jacob's seeing into Eden, and he's seeing, oh, Eden's coming back again. That's what is going on here. So Jacob raises up and he says, God was here, I didn't even know it. And he says, I promise you, God, if you are faithful to what you said to me, I will be faithful to you. And that ultimately tells a story about us. You see, Jacob responds to God's call. God calls first. Jacob answers. Remember, the New Testament says we love him because he first loved us, not the other way around. We didn't first love God. God wasn't just mad at us. God loved us, so he came. For it's the oldest scripture we all know, John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave. Hallelujah. So it says, Jacob rose in the morning, and then he took the stone he had put on his head, set it up as a pillar, and poured oil on it. Consecrated it. Set it apart. What did he set it apart as? It's a stone. It's a miniature little mountain. That's what all of this stuff is coming back. He's like, this place is marked. Boom. This is where I saw God. This is heaven. Eden has come back into his life again. Now, does he fully live it out? Well, no, we're about to see that. So Jacob goes on his journey and came back to the land of his father. And so he gets, or the land of Abraham, and it's actually Laban's land. So Laban is Jacob's uncle, and remember, it's Rebekah who is Isaac's wife's brother. That was really confusing. So Abraham had his whole family, and then he has Isaac. Abraham sends back to his family, and then the son of Jacob's brother is Laban. So this is the son of Abraham's brother is Laban. So this is Abraham's nephew from back where they're from, and Rebekah was his niece from back where they're from. Rebekah comes and marries Isaac, and then after they trick Isaac and trick Esau, and Esau wants to kill Jacob, she sends him back to Laban. And so Jacob comes to Laban's fields, and he ends up meeting his cousin, which remember back then it's a lot more normal. For us, this is gross, kissing cousins, but for them it was about purity of religion, purity of clan, all of that stuff. But Jacob kissed Rachel. She comes up, and he ends up falling in love with her. And so Laban heard that Jacob came, and he said, you are my bone and my flesh. And Jacob stayed with him. So remember that language of bone and flesh goes way right back into the Garden of Eden. That imagery kind of comes back. But here, it obviously is going to be twisted, because marriage happens right after that. It's no mistake that he says, surely you are my bone and my flesh. And then he's going to give his daughters in marriage to Jacob. But there's a little bit of deception. There's a little bit of something wrong. So we can see that what was supposed to be good, you are bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, in the garden, has been twisted by Laban and twisted into something it's not supposed to be. We get that sense here. And Laban says to Jacob, because you're my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? And so Jacob's like helping him around. And Laban's like, what should I pay you? And Laban had 2 daughters. And Jacob goes, hey, I really like Rachel. I love her, and I want to spend, and I'll serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. And Laban said, it's better that I give her to you than I should give her to another man. Stay with me. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed only a few days to him because of the love he had for her. Now, that's the truth, man. It's like it seems like just not even long ago that I even met Caitlin. I mean, at the same time, it feels like, we've been together our entire, like I've never not known her, but I know it's just time flies when I live with her and get to love her. And that's kind of what happens here for Jacob. And so Jacob said to Laban after 7 years, he says, give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go into her. And Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. Now it came to pass in the evening, he took Leah his daughter and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. And Laban gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid. So it came to pass in the morning that, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? So I guess Jacob was like really drunk, or it was just really late. Maybe they didn't have lights like we do now. So maybe it was just really late. She was veiled, and then, whatever, things happen. But and this is not the first time in Genesis where there's mistaken union like this under the cover of night, where people didn't know what was going on. It's going to happen to one of Jacob's sons later in Genesis, and it happened a lot earlier in Genesis. See, these things keep repeating themselves, but Jacob has been deceived, and that's where I want to harp on right here. One, Laban's twisting the union of marriage. It gets twisted. You see, sin twists the good things of God. It is not. See, a lot of times with sin, it's like we treat these things as if they are inherently bad. It's like sex is not bad. Money in and of itself is not bad. Power in and of itself is not bad. All of these things were used, well, I mean, Jesus didn't have sex, but but all of these things are used by God in covenantal good ways, and are ways God blesses us and gives to us. But the love of money is bad. Jesus said it was the root of every evil. Why? Because the love of money makes you hurt other people to get more of what you need. The love of sex over God can end up with you hurting somebody to only pleasure yourself instead of it being an act of service to one you're in covenant with. And that's usually what sex turns into, even in marriages. A lot of times in marriages, sex is not approached correctly. A lot of time it hurts people because they don't approach it in their own life. It's only a means to relieve oneself, but it's not improper union with God. And for power, well, Jesus when he ends and he's resurrected, all power and authority was given to him. So power and these things are not bad in and of themselves. They are to be used in God's way for the goodness of the kingdom and those around us. And in specific ways with specific people. And when they're not used in those ways, they are hurtful. Just like it hurt Jacob. Just like the lust for power for Jacob, for the blessing, hurt Esau. All of these things, and it comes back to bite Jacob. So that's the other thing I want to say. I really like what Jordan Peterson said it this way, and it's something I don't think I can say it better, so I repeat it here. He says, you can't twist the fabric of reality and not expect a wrinkle out here. And that's what's happening, is Jacob has reached into that fabric of reality, twisted it for his own gain, and he's feeling the ripple effect of the wrinkles around him. Because would Jacob even be here experiencing this if he had not deceived his brother and his father? No, he would be at home. So Jacob is feeling the results of his own lust for power and wealth and all of these things. And Laban has his own things he's trying to do. And so he's a deceiver just as much as Jacob. So the deceiver's getting deceived. And that's what happens, is when you get in this game of sin, it ends up twisting the fabric of reality all around your life. And you may not trace, oh, he's doing this to me, so I'm justified and blah, blah, blah. But maybe you're in that position in the first place because of what you did back here. and you don't even realize the spiritual or even just natural implications of your actions. And that's what's happening with Jacob. And it's a twisting of what God intends for good. God intends that blessing of Abraham for good. Jacob twisted it. God intends marriage for good, but now Laban has twisted it on Jacob. So the deceiver has become deceived, and Jacob is being cursed. However, that is not the end of the story, and it gets better for Jacob. So instead of Laban just leaving it, Jacob's like, well, you promised me Rachel. And he's like, well, am I supposed to give off the younger daughter before the first? Again, more ancient custom. And Jacob goes, I'll serve you another 7 years for Rachel. So he gives Rachel to Jacob. Again, it seemed like only a few days. But here's the thing. This next story is so interesting. The whole next chapter is about this sort of argument between Leah and Rachel, and then ultimately their two maids that they have. They are Bilhah and Zilpah are their names. Oh, mouthfuls. But there's this whole argument that begins to happen in Jacob's house. So because marriage was intended by God from the beginning, Jesus says, in the beginning, man and woman together, one flesh, one man, one woman, were meant to be together. And every twisting of that, while the Bible, for a long time, until Jesus says that, ultimately, does not explicitly just, like, God doesn't come out to Abraham and say, oh, you can't have multiple wives, or even to Jacob, or even to David, or any of these things. It is when Jesus comes and he goes, hey, this is the original intention. The Bible goes subtly, and it's like every time you see a situation like where there's these multiple wives, there's something going on in there that's, well, this isn't quite right. We see it with Solomon. We see it with David. We see it over and over and over again as kings, more and more wives for themselves, the more and more trouble they have. Happens to Abraham when he does with Hagar. Happens to Jacob here. It happens all throughout. But God uses it. That's the thing. God using it doesn't necessarily mean God condones it. And there's even a subtle undertone here that this isn't quite right. So Leah, it says that God saw Leah was unloved, so he started blessing her with children. Rachel was barren, and she couldn't have children, so she gave Jacob her servant, so that her servant Bilhah could have children in her stead. And so remember, this is exactly what Sarah does. And remember, God didn't like it back then. God's going to use it. It's going to be fine. But ultimately, the important players are not any of these people. It's the one that comes from Rachel, who is barren, and she ends up having kids. I'm getting ahead of myself. So Leah and Rachel start getting in these arguments. Jacob loves Leah. Leah's kind of mad. She's thinking, oh, maybe Jacob will love me finally. And she has kid after kid after kid. They're each named certain things about how they feel. So Reuben is named Reuben because, let's see. Leah conceived and bore a son, called his name Reuben, for she said, the Lord has surely looked on my affliction, therefore my husband will love me. And she named him like that. Then she bore Simeon, and she said, now this time my husband will become attached to me, because I've borne this, and this, and this, and this. And so it keeps on going down. She has Reuben, and she has Simeon and Levi, and she has Judah, because she praised God. Then Rachel gives her servant, and her servant has Dan and Naphtali. And then Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, so she took Zilpah, her maid, and was like, okay, well, I'll have even more kids, and really rub it into Rachel. And so she has Gad, and then Asher. And then Rachel finally, then Leah has another kid, because there's like this whole weird story. Oh, this is really interesting, actually. Getting kind of lost in the weeds. This is interesting. So it stops in the middle of all the kids they're having. And it says, now Reuben went in the days of wheat harvest and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. But she said to her, "Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you also take away my son's mandrakes?" And Rachel said, "Fine, he can lay with you tonight." And Jacob came out of the field in the evening. Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come into me, for I've surely hired you with my son's mandrakes." And he laid with her that night. What a weird story. It says, "And God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son." Where she said, "God has given me my wages, because I have given my maid to my husband." And she called his name Issachar. And then she conceived again and had Jacob a sixth son. But notice here, like there's this thing around the fruit. That is a repeat of looked and saw it was good and took. And so there's contention here in Jacob's own house. There's deception. There's deceiving behind his back. Jacob is getting it from his uncle. Now he's getting it from his wives. He's being used. And all of these things, and it's all around him. So when you get into the life of deception, it spreads out in those around you, in your family, in your society, all of these things. That's what this is trying to show us, that the family unit is something sacred. And when it is broken and you don't live a personal moral life, it bleeds into those around you, especially those who are under your influence, even in your household. It's crazy. It's so amazing what the Bible does with this. But then it says, God remembered Rachel. And he listened to her and opened her womb. And she conceived and bore a son, and said, God has taken away my reproach. So she named him Joseph, and said, the Lord shall add to me another son. And so that's where it ends off, with this whole battle for sons. And Joseph's the last one. And remember, the important ones, all throughout Genesis, it happens over and over again. It happens for Abraham, it happens for Isaac, and now it's happened for Jacob. That these sons that were born from women who couldn't conceive. And those are the sons that God's doing something with. There's like this spiritual attack that has been on generation after generation after generation, because those sons have something to do for the Lord. We see it so clearly in Joseph, because he's the next big thing in the story. But he's also not the only one. Judah has a big part to play. So God's not just playing favorites here. He ends up blessing Leah the same way he blesses Rachel. He blesses all of these 12 sons. And it says, it came to pass, when Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, send me away that I may go to my own place, to my own country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I've served you, and let me go, for you know my service, which I have done for you. And Laban said to him, please stay if I've found favor in your eyes, for I've learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake. Then he said, name me your wages, and I will give it. So Laban says he's recognized there's something on you specifically, that the Lord has blessed you. And because I'm giving you a job, he's been blessing me. So I don't want you to go. And that is the blessing of Abraham that's on him. Remember, God said he would be with him. Even though all of this is going on, all of this deception, all of this brokenness that is going on, even in his family unit, God is there working in the background. And so there's this whole story where Jacob says, Laban's like, tell me your wages. What shall I give you? And Jacob said, you won't give me anything. If you'll do this for me, I will again feed and keep your flocks. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from there all the speckled and spotted sheep, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and the spotted and speckled among the goats. They'll be my wages. So note here, he doesn't take for himself. The spotted and speckled ones are not the best ones. God doesn't even take those later in the sacrifices, remember. Jacob says, I will take an inferior cut, and I'll serve you. Just let me do that. And God takes that. He says, so my righteousness will answer for me in time to come. When the subject of my wages comes before you, everyone that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and brown among the lambs will be considered stolen if it is with me. And Laban said, all right, let's do it. And so it ends up, they put 3 days journey between them, and Jacob, he's tending them, and they end up producing a lot. Spotted ones end up producing more spotted and more spotted, more spotted. But here's the thing, is what Laban does is that Laban tries to cheat him. So he sees that Jacob was like, he took them and they bore streaked and speckled and spotted. And then Jacob separated the lambs and made flock. And he said he made the flocks face toward the streaked and all the brown in the flock of Laban. So he put his own flocks by themselves, did not put them with Laban's flock. And it came to pass, whenever the stronger livestock conceived, that Jacob placed the rods before the eyes of the livestock in the gutters. That's a little bit of ancient superstition. He's looking there. God's using it for him, but Jacob's not beyond that. He's from 3,000 years ago, and so that they might conceive among the rods. But when the flocks were feeble, he did not put them in. So the feebler were Laban's and the stronger Jacob's. So essentially, Jacob did this little ritual thing, and he put the stronger ones so they would bear spotted there, and they came out spotted. So all these things keep coming out for Jacob, and Jacob's wealth starts getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And you see in this next passage that he's like, Jacob. So Jacob's getting so wealthy among Laban's flock. All of Laban's sons are saying, Jacob's taken away all that was our father's, and from what was our father's, he's acquired all this wealth. And Jacob saw the countenance of Laban, and indeed it was not favorable toward him. Laban didn't like him anymore. And the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your family. I'll be with you. So Jacob sent, called Rachel and Leah to the field to his flock, and said to them, I see your father's countenance. It's not favorable towards me, but God has been with me. And you know that with all my might I have served your father. But your father has deceived me. He's changed my wages 10 times. But God did not allow him to hurt me. If he said, the speckled shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore speckled. And if he said, the streaked shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked. So God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. Wow. So Jacob, that's what Jacob's saying, is ultimately that when Laban was like, okay, what are your wages? Jacob said, I'll take the speckled ones. God produces speckled. And then Laban goes, oh, well, actually, you get the regular ones. And then, so they all started bearing regular. And this happened, Jacob said, 10 times. And so he's like, all right, Laban thinks I'm cheating him. I'm not, God's just blessing me. He's deceiving me. God said, let's go. And so it happened at the time when the flocks conceives. Oh, listen to this. This is cool. And it happened at the time when the flocks conceived that I lifted my eyes and saw in a dream. And behold, the rams which leaped upon the flocks were streaked, speckled, and gray spotted. Then the angel of God spoke to me in a dream, saying, Jacob. And I said, here I am. And he said, lift your eyes now and see. All the rams which leap on the flocks are streaked, speckled, and gray spotted. For I have seen all that Laban's doing to you. I'm the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar, and where you made a vow to me. Now arise, get out of this land, and return to the land of your family. So that God that stood on the stairway says, come back. It's time to come back. I've been with you. It's cool. Now it's time to come back. And so they start leaving. Laban gets mad because one of Jacob's wives steals a household god, and that's the whole thing. But Laban comes back. He's like, you've stolen some stuff from me. And Jacob's like, whatever you've stolen from me, you can kill the person that stole it, basically. He didn't know that Rachel stole it. And so Laban walks in, and Rachel doesn't get up. She says, oh, it's my time of the month. and Laban's like, okay, because it was a custom for the women to stand up when men, especially their fathers, entered the room. And so she's like, I can't stand up, because she had hidden under her the household gods. Laban didn't find it, so he left. And finally, so Laban didn't find them, and Jacob was angry. And he's like, see, what have I done to you? What is my sin that you are so hotly pursuing me? Although you have searched all my things, what part of your household have you found? Set it here before my brethren and your brethren, that they may judge between us both. These 20 years I have been with you. Your male and female goats have not miscarried their young. I have not eaten the rams of your flock. That which was torn by beast I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it. You required it from my hand, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was. In the day the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from my eyes. Thus I have been in your house 20 years. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. Unless the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked you last night. So Jacob left. And Laban was like, I don't like this. I want all my stuff back. And there's this confrontation. But Jacob's like, no, this is mine. God kept me. You tried to deceive me. That's the thing, is Jacob doesn't deserve what God's doing. Remember, he was a deceiver. But God does it anyway. And this is what ends up bringing Jacob full circle. And we're about to talk about that. And then we'll end. And Laban answered and said to Jacob, these daughters are my daughters, these children are my children, this flock is my flock, all you see is mine. But what can I do this day to these my daughters or to their children whom they born? Now therefore come, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me. So they set up a pillar, and they made a covenant there. And they set up a pillar, and he says, this is my part, and that's your part. And Laban said to Jacob, here is this heap, and here's this pillar which I have placed between you and me. The heap is a witness. This pillar is a witness, that I will not pass beyond this heap to you, and you will not pass beyond this heap and pillar to me for harm. For harm. The God of Abraham, God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. The God of Nahor is Abraham's father. Isn't that interesting? Because actually, even originally, the very first person God talks to is Nahor, and then Abraham takes the call after. But our God judged between us. And Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. And Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain and called his brethren to eat bread. Notice there, they ate bread and stayed all night on the mountain. He called his brethren to eat bread because eating bread is how you participated in the sacrifice. A little fast forward, that's why we have communion. Just a little plug there. We'll get to that. And early in the morning, Laban rose, kissed his sons and daughters, and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned to this place. So there's this whole story. Jacob finally leaves Laban. Laban follows him because Rachel had stolen some household gods. She was still holding on to some. It kind of reminds me of Lot's wife. What she does, how she looks backward and gets judged for it. But she's kept here. She's a little deceitful too. And Laban, it turns on Laban. And Jacob's like, I haven't stolen anything from you. You've stolen from me, but God's kept me. So Laban's like, fine, this is all my stuff, but they're going to go with you. God will judge between us. You don't cross here. I won't cross here. Eat together. We'll say our piece and go. So there's a little bit of struggle there. Again, conflict between nations. When nations should be blessed, they're ended up losing. So Jacob went on his way. The angels of God met him. When Jacob saw him, he said, this is God's camp. So he called that place Mahanaim. And then it says, listen to this. Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And he commanded them, saying, speak this way to my lord Esau. Thus your servant Jacob says, I've dwelt with Laban and stayed there until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, and male and female servants, and I have sent to tell my lord that I may find favor in your sight. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to your brother Esau. He is also coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him. So Jacob was very afraid. He thinks Esau is still wanting to kill him. And he divided the people that were with him and the flocks and herds and camels into 2 companies. And he says, if Esau comes to one company and attacks it, then the other company which is left will escape. So he's planning this way of escape. And he's sending people, his own people, in front of him. So even some of his own children. And Jacob says, he starts praying, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord who said to me, return to your country and to your family, and I will deal well with you. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and all the truth which you have shown your servant. For I've crossed this Jordan with my staff, and now I have become 2 companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau. For I fear him, lest he come and attack me, and the mother with the children. For you said, I will surely treat you well, and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. So it says he lodged there that same night. And so he took what he had, and he starts sending presents to Esau. And then it says he even sent that night and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed over the ford. He took them, sent them over the brook, sent over what he had, and he was left alone. So he's sending everything he has in front of him. Jacob is afraid, so he's putting his wives, his kids, everything he has, his servants, everything. If Jacob's going to kill him, he's going to kill him. But he's sending all of it in front of him. At least he'll escape. And so God shows up, though. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Now when he saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was so out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, let me go, for the day breaks. But he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. So he said to him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. And Jacob said, saying, tell me your name, I pray. And he said, why is it you ask about my name? And he blessed him there. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel. For I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. Just as he crossed over Peniel, the sun rose on him, and he limped on his hip. Therefore to this day the children of Israel do not eat the muscle that shrank, which is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip in the muscle that shrank. Okay, so this story happens, and the God that was on top of the staircase, the God that appeared to Jacob to tell him to go home, has descended the stairway and come into Jacob's life. And Jacob starts to wrestle him. And he's wrestling, and he's wrestling, and he's wrestling, and finally God's just had enough, and he touches his hip, and it goes out of joint, but Jacob's still holding on. And he's like, why won't you let me go? And Jacob says, I'm not going to go until you bless me. And God says, your name is not deceiver anymore, but it is Israel, one who strives with God. For you have fought with God and with man and have prevailed. So here's the thing. Did Jacob prevail in that wrestling match? No. He lost. But even when he lost, even when his walk changed, even when he had nothing else, he was holding on to God to get everything he could have. And that's the point, is when he realized this person is greater than I am, he's got something for me. He held on. Maybe it was for selfish motive, but he would still hold on. And it is then that God changed his name. And he said, your name's not deceiver anymore. It is one who strives with God. There is a part of us, Israel, that becomes the name of the entire people of God, is Israel, named after him. Jacob's name changes in a few chapters forever. He's not called Jacob anymore. He's called Israel. Why? Because Jacob was the deceiver. He was fighting with men, and he overcame them. He was fought with Laban. He fought with Esau. And now, but really, those were just stand-ins. Those were just physical embodied representations of this wrestling match he's been having in his spirit the whole time. He's been wrestling with God. But here's the thing. How does Jacob prevail against God? Losing. He loses. He was still holding on. But he was overcome. He didn't win. He didn't overcome God and get his way. God knocked his hip, and he's about to walk differently. In fact, it says in the beginning of the next chapter, it says Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and there Esau was coming. And he divided his children among Leah and Rachel, and he put the maidservants and their children in front, and Leah and their children behind, and Rachel and Joseph last. And he crossed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times. So where he was walking behind them and sent everything ahead, he has now switched after this, limp and all, to go before Esau with only God at his side. And that's what I'm here to say, is that Jacob's name changed when he realized that all he had to do was keep holding on. This wrestling match that we have with God, we only lose that wrestling match when we keep fighting instead of holding on and beginning to walk different. We keep fighting with God. All of us do it. All of us fight with God. All of us have fought with other people. We all have these things that we don't quite trust God on. We don't we went our own way on. So we'll wrestle with God. And when we do that, we don't even realize that that's what's hurting us in the long run. Jacob has wrestled with God his whole life, and he finally had to be knocked out to where he walked differently. And all of us have this encounter. Remember, the story of the Bible is God in search of man. Was Jacob looking for God? No, God appeared to him. And he made him walk different. And he said, I'm going to use you to bless the world. And you're going to walk different. And finally, Jacob gives in. And he walks differently. And the nation that he had cursed has now become the nation that he blesses. And he comes to Esau, and he bows himself to the ground 7 times, and he came to Esau, and he embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept together. And he said, these are the children that God gave to me. And then Esau's like, what do you mean by everything you've brought to me? And Jacob said, these are to find favor in your sight. And Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have found for yourself. And Jacob says, no, please, if I have found favor in your sight, receive my present from my hand. Inasmuch as I have seen your face, as though I had seen the face of God, and you were pleased with me. So the one he's been fighting all along now looks at him as if it was God himself and says, I'm pleased with you. And that's the story. The reason Jacob turned, his walk literally gets different because he encounters God and realizes he can only win this wrestling match by holding on in surrender, by going out in front of mankind who could kill him with only God at his back. Up there, vulnerable. And that's what we all do ultimately. All of us against the great enemy of our souls, the devil, were vulnerable and enslaved. And we were walking with our own limps. But Jesus walks with us. He walks for us. We were wrestling against God, but he made us walk different. And we must forever remember that. And we must always come back to it because we have this tendency to get back in the wrestling match. Let yourself lose the wrestling match. Let yourself lose to God. It is only when you lose to God that you win. It is only when you find yourself in enslavement to Jesus. Remember, that's what the apostles called themselves, that we are slaves of Jesus. But that's where they found their true freedom. They saw slavery all around them, but they realized that that has no bearing on what I am. I am a slave to Jesus. And if I'm a slave to him, this world can't tell me what I am because I'm really free from all this world has. I am free from Satan. I am free from sin. And I'm free from darkness. So I pray for that to you today. If you're in a wrestling match with God, let him make you walk different. Let him knock your hip out of joint. Lose that match. And then you will realize that it was God's face all along. The face you thought was judgmental, the face you thought was your enemy, is the face that will look at you and realize that he is pleased with you. Thank you for listening today. We're going to end here, and we'll finish up Jacob next week with Caitlin with us. So God bless you. Thank you for listening today. And let me pray for you. Lord, help us today lose the wrestling match and realize that you, Jesus, descended that stairway and have walked into our lives. We thought that nothing good could come out of seeing you, that we didn't even know you were there like Jacob, but you are there in search of us. Just saying, come and see. I have something for you. I'm pleased with you, and I love you. So thank you, Lord, for all you do for us. You are good, and your mercy endures forever and ever. Be with us as we go, and help us lose the fight so that we can grasp and win eternal life. In Jesus' name. Thank you so much, and God bless. Bye. Thank you for joining the podcast today. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed making it. Please consider liking, subscribing, or leaving a review. And if you would like to know more about us and our ministry, visit dwellamongus.org. God bless, and thank you.